It's 7:02. We'll kick this off. I want to thank everybody for joining online. One of the things that came out of the pandemic is we're able to do some meetings. They figured out technology to get a lot of people together at times otherwise we couldn't join each other. And I want to thank everybody for being here. My special guests are Representative Mark Owens and Representative Ken Helm. Quite quick bio on Representative Owens. He is Eastern Oregon. He actually is in a different time zone for us, so he's an hour ahead of us doing those things. His specialty is groundwater, and he is a farmer, and he takes care of alfalfa and hay and does his stuff like that. Then Ken Helm, who I've known for quite a while, since 2017, he and I shared the same floor in the Capitol on the second or on the fourth floor, and he and I really hit it off. We talked about fishing, and he loves to fish. I love to fish, but he knows his water resources, surface water and groundwater. But he has a place he gets to come hang out here in Hood River, so he gets to enjoy our water, or our beautiful part of the district. But he understands like the irrigation portion of what Hood River means and what the old water system looked like when it was open canals to where they've closed the canals and using these micro sprinklers and all the different things. Because I learned a lot from him on the first go around when I was in Salem, when we talked about upgrading the water systems in the irrigation districts here in the Hood River Valley. So with that, Representative Owens, why don't you take it away and kind of do your thing that you do?
Thanks, Rep Helfrich. Thanks, Natalie, for helping us get organized and get everybody in the room. Appreciate the opportunity to come some of what happened in the session and take a lot of questions. I think that's our main objective today. Just give a little introduction of who I am. Jeff, that's okay. Did very well doing that. I'm a first-generation farmer in Eastern Oregon. I serve and represent House District 60. House District 60 is 37% of the southeast of the state. All of Malheur, Harney, Lake, Baker, Grant, and a small part of Crook County. A lot of water challenges in a lot of our closed basins. Water is probably what drove me into. I've been very fortunate to even work with Representative Helm before I became a legislator. He would travel out, join some of our place-based planning groups, have some conversations, and since then we've worked well together. I'm very grateful for the opportunities to have. And just to put a little connection to Hood River, my wife is a MERS. They are have an orchard up in Parkdale. So I have been in Parkdale, Hood River, know very little about orcharding, but enough to get me in trouble. And I'll hand it over to Representative Helm.
Thanks. I'm also very pleased to be with you folks. I represent House District 27, which is part of Washington County and Beaverton in the Portland area. And I've served in the legislature since 2015. My background professionally as a land use attorney, now retired from that. So that skill set has always channeled me into committees that have to do with land use and natural resources. So currently I'm the chair of the Agriculture, Land Use, Water, and Natural Resources Committee. I've served on that committee since I entered in 2015. I've also spent every session in the Energy and Environment Committee, which looks at obviously energy issues, but mostly electric generation, and then environment from a lot of different points of view. And I've also served on the Housing Committee this time with Representative Helfrich, who's the vice chair of that committee, and we did a lot of good work this time in that committee, and the Judiciary Committee. And yes, I have a connection to your world. I have one of my favorite places in the world is up in the Upper Valley, and I spend a considerable amount of time there, and just enjoy being in that part of your home. I think we were gonna. I was going to give a sort of a broad overview of the areas that we focused on for water this session and tell you a little bit about how much we appropriated for those uses. And then Mark had some specific instances of work that we did that are meaningful to his district, but also have broad appeal across the state. So we were able to advocate for an appropriation of funding in the water sphere this session that was pretty unprecedented. Overall, we appropriated about $143 million for water. Some of that money was for water infrastructure that had to do with the needs of particular districts, especially small cities all around the state. And that was taken care of through specific asks from representatives advocating for those small cities. The rest was really Rep. Owens and I advocated strongly for the spending of the money and explained how and where we need it as a state. That money was spent in 7 buckets. The first bucket is called planning, coordination, and capacity. This is how we plan to manage water better, find better sources of water, be able to use water efficiently and conserve water, and what you do with that conserved water. The second bucket is data and analysis. The state needs good data to make good decisions about water. That data is hard to get, and despite what we may think here in the 21st century, the state's data on water in all its iterations, both water quality and water quantity, is not very good. We've not been able to accumulate what we really need to have in most basins, not all basins. Some basins have good data, but in general across the state, we are much in need of more data about how much water we have, what water temperatures are like, seasonal flows, and that type of thing so that we can make better decisions. So that's another bucket. We also focused on drinking water security. As many of you may be on a small community water system. You may have your own well, or you may be part of a municipal water supply. They're all different in many ways. One of the ways that they're the same, though, is a lot of them are old. And so the operation and maintenance of those facilities is a constant need for new money and new work. And we knew that, and we tried to put some money toward it. We worked on agricultural resilience, which I know will be very important to many of you. How we adapt to climate change and how we allocate water to better serve the crops that we grow, and how we also are strategic about protecting both the people that work in agriculture and the lands that we need to preserve to make sure that agriculture continues as a healthy economic force in the state. At the same time, we had a bucket on in-stream and fish and wildlife needs. Those needs are equally important. As many of you know, on the fish side, we have 13 species of salmonids in the Columbia Basin that are listed as threatened or endangered, and that causes real difficulties for managing water and conducting agriculture. The sooner that we correct that problem, the better it'll be for farmers and municipalities that need the water as well. Not to mention doing what we should be doing for the fish and wildlife. We spent a good deal of money on specific water project investments, and one of those is the irrigation modernization effort, in which we allocated $50 million, so $50 million to help irrigation districts modernize their systems. Mark mentioned that, and I'll let him talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Important thing there is every dollar that we invest in irrigation modernization will be matched by 3 other federal dollars. So it is a huge return on investment, and we were really pleased to get that done. Then finally, water management in Oregon for decades and decades has been done from a top-down type of approach, where the Water Resources Department sort of decides how it's going to be and tells local jurisdictions and local people how to do things. That paradigm needs to shift, and we need to be working on bottom-up, community-based and community-driven water decisions. To do that, we have to put some state money in outreach, education, and understanding at the community level, so that people in local communities can have their voices heard, and that as they organize around their needs, that they have capacity in their organizations to be part of the larger state conversation that we have about water. So that's the broad overview of the types of things we spent money on. And I'll hand it over to Mark to talk about some of the specific programs that he's championed.
Take myself on mute. First time I've been on Zoom for at least an hour. Thanks, Ken. I appreciate that. It's always good when we have about 3 minutes of preparatory work on what we're going to say before we start the town hall. So if this is a little clunky, that's because it is. Ken did a good job of giving the broad spectrum of the drought modernization package that came through. It manifested itself in House Bill 2010. That's what he broke down. It had 11 policies in it, or 12 policies, and it had a lot of good funding. Some of those specific policies I'll just touch on real quick. One of them started out at House Bill 3103. It was working with OSU Extension and putting more ag extension agents out through Oregon just to focus on water, work with farmers and ranchers to figure out how we can do more with less, how we can embrace technology, and how we can be set up for a water-constrained environment. Because, folks, we are in a water-constrained environment. There's more demand for water, and there's less typical flow of water. And unless we change how we manage water, we're going to be in a tough spot. Previously, there was only a couple extension officers who were working across the state that were authorized in 2019. This will put out 8 more. So hopefully there's one in Hood River. Hopefully there's one towards Estacada or wherever else that can work with you guys, figure out how we can have a more efficient system, and also how we can expand agriculture. Another one that's probably near and dear to my heart is place-based planning. Place-based planning was a pilot program that started in 2015. There was 4 different communities across the state of Oregon that were given the opportunity to figure out how to work with the state to come up with in-stream, out-of-stream water plans. It's like Ken was saying, from the bottom up. That given a sunset, we had taken the sunset off. What we did was finally throw away the sunset. And I'll take a phrase that one of my colleagues used on a different bill is, it was time to take the training wheels off and time to figure out how we could ride this into the future. We did that. We also capitalized that with a couple $1 million for other communities to have opportunities that myself and Harney County have had. Irrigation modernization, a big one. A lot of your local groups, your irrigation districts in Rep Helfrich district is going to take advantage of this, and that's good. That's what it was set up for. Farmers Conservation Alliance, as you guys know, a lot of it have worked with a lot of communities and have been very successful in tapping into PL 566, tapping into federal funding in order to bring big dollars into irrigation modernization. The big missing hole right now is that local match that's needed. So if you've qualified for a federal grant, most of the time it comes with an obligation to have a 25% local match. If we don't find that, somebody else is going to take that federal funding. That's when Ken said we put together a $50 million grant opportunity for those that have applied for or are applying for federal match in order to pull down a portion, if not all, of that local match that's needed. So we'll take that 50 million, hopefully multiply it by 4 and bring in $200 million to the state. Is that what was needed across the state? No. I mean, we needed, I forget exactly what it was, but close to $300 million. Did we make a dent in it? Yes, we did. This whole modernization package was a continuation from 2021. We were able to successfully work with our colleagues, work with their presiding officers, bicameral, bipartisan, in order to continue the funding stream that we got in 2023. And that's important, as water is not a partisan issue. Ken and I'll show that. Rep Helfrich has the same attitude that Ken and I do. I mean, housing isn't a bipartisan, isn't a partisan issue. We work together in order to bring forward the best policy we can for the state. I'll just maybe opine just for a few minutes. 2021, 2023, these water packages have come forward is because we've traveled the state together and listened and tried to understand what communities need and try to understand how we can inject policy to make that difference. When we look at the water situation in 11 Western states, or we look at the water situation in Oregon, things need to change. Since 1909 in the Water Code, 1955, the Groundwater Act, not the whole, but the majority of Water Resource Department job was to figure out how to allocate water. That is what their system is set up for. You know, ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot less water to allocate and a lot more water to figure out how to manage. We have to change that. We got to figure out how we come in, work with communities, figure out how we can grow agriculture. We can grow agriculture and still provide potable water for all and still have healthy fish runs. We can. Oregon's one of the few Western states that actually have the opportunity to do that. Might have something to do with the Columbia River, might have something to do with something else, might have something to do with possibilities for recharge, but we can. And that's what our mission is. But now I'm going to be quiet because, like I said, we need to listen to you guys to figure out what we do next. Rep Helfrich.
Hey, thanks, Representative Owens. I appreciate that. And Representative Helm, you said it, just to let people know that have joined that this is being recorded. So if you want to get clips of that, you can be able to get a recording of that. And I want to kind of highlight something that Representative Owens and Representative Helm said. But Representative Helm and I both work on housing and homelessness issues. It's not a partisan issue. It's a bipartisan issue. We want to make sure people have a place to live, be safe and secure. And without water, you know, that's a problem. So we have to make sure our water resources are managed right. We have to make sure our farming community, agricultural community gets the water that they need. Because for me in the district here, this goes from the Dalles all the way to the Sandy River, catches a lot of Clackamas in the backside of all of Mount Hood, and then parts of Wasco and all of Hood River. Agriculture is a big portion of our economy here. And it's a big driver. But if we want to bring people into homes and have businesses here, it's a resource that we have to manage real carefully. So with that, my chief of staff, Natalie, do we have some questions that we're looking at right now?
I'm gonna drop one in the chat box to get us started. Somebody emailed me because they couldn't make it tonight. So I'll drop that one in so we get started. If anyone else has questions, just drop them in the chat box and we'll start working our way through them.
Yeah, okay, go. I'm not sure who asked the question, but we are extremely worried about drought, excessive temps, and lack of irrigation. These have major implications to our small growing operation. We may have to give up the farm because in many ways this has harmed our productivity. We would have to take out land out of farm deferral status to pay a lot of money back to taxes. Looking for a systematic change to offset these problems. Can you help change the Oregon tax laws so we don't have to pay taxes back if we have to surrender our farm because of climate change, lack of irrigation, drought, etc.? Ken, I'm seeing your head nod on that one. You want to take a shot at that one?
Actually, Mark, I think, is best suited to answer that question. We have that this is a common comment, and it's an important one, and we have given some thought to this, and we did tackle the issue of farm deferral from one perspective, and Mark's office took the lead on that, and maybe he can talk a little bit more about that. But it is an issue that needs some work, and I'm certainly sympathetic to the person that asked the question.
Thanks, Ken. Always give me the easy ones. So the first thing I'm going to say is the Oregon tax law is very convoluted. I know not much about it. Send Rep Helfrich an email on some more specifics, because I'm believing that you're going to take land out of farm deferral to sell it for a different source, and you have to pay the back taxes. We'd have to look at that if there can be something done with a drought declaration or climate change in order to get a loophole with that. We have people on both of our caucuses that can really help with that on revenue and taxation. We'll need some more information. What we did do in the drought package in one of the policy bills is currently a farmer can lease part of their water in stream. or all of their water in stream. And that is considered a beneficial use. Farmers are normally paid for that. So typically, you know, a farmer can grow maybe 60, 70% of their crop on 50% of the water. In the August, the dog days of summer, when temperatures increase, yields go down and you have to put on just as much or more water. There's an economic opportunity for sometimes for farmers to leave water in stream at that time. It helps fish runs when the water is at the lowest, and they get compensated for that. But there's an issue if you take your water and have part of it that does not receive irrigation, even though it's a beneficial use and you're not actively farming, do you still qualify for farm deferral taxes? We were concerned about that. We went through a policy bill that if a farmer chooses to voluntarily lease water in stream, they will not forfeit their farm deferral as long as they keep that land in common farming practice. So that was the first thing we tackled on the tax issue. More than willing to look to see if we can tackle more of your issues. Talking about drought and talking about, you know, adapting to crops. And if you look in Jefferson County, there's years now where farms don't get water. How do we keep them solvent? It's more than just, for lack of a better term, band-aids. It's more than just giving them money in order to pay their dues if they don't get water. We have to figure out how we change the system. We have to figure out how farmers can share water between them, even if it's out of district. We got to figure out water banks. But mainly, we also got to slow water down. It doesn't have to be hard infrastructure. It can be soft infrastructure. It could be beavers. It can be riparian areas. But if we're going to get multiple benefit out of water, we have to slow it down from the uplands. We got to make sure the sponge gets soaked up, and we have more water later in the year. Not exactly the answer I think you wanted, but Rep. Helfrich will get some more information and we'll do some follow-up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing some stuff in the chat too, and want to know a couple things about land use and stuff. So if you want to email me to my Rep. Jeff Helfrich account, we'll be more than happy to look at those questions if we don't get to them tonight, and then turn around and get you some answers, or at least get you put in the right direction where we're at. Natalie, what do you have for our next question?
I don't have any in my inbox right now. So if anyone wants to add a specific question, oh, thank you. Here's another Natalie, just dropped one into the chat box for you.
All right, are there any future changes to the rules around how water is allocated and or what qualifies as a beneficial use that you could see being viable in addition to the infrastructure modernization?
So I'll jump in this time, and so that Mark doesn't have to do all the talking. So the way water is allocated in the state, many of you are familiar with. It's called the prior appropriation system. The code for that is first in time, first in right, and it's a 19th century mechanism that is trying these days to tackle a 21st century problem, which is how to equitably and efficiently allocate water around the state. We have different needs now, obviously, than we did in 1909 when the water code was developed. We need to have a system that is significantly more sophisticated than the one we set up over 100 years ago. And for that reason, we find ourselves in a situation in which almost every basin is over allocated, which means the Water Resources Department has been giving out more water rights and water permits than water is available. And this is not to criticize the department. It has been the policy of the state to use water for economic development for most of the 20th century. And there's a long tail on that type of policy. When you do that, though, it makes it very much harder to know how much water is left and how you're going to manage it. And so Mark suggested in the interim of last year that he and I work on how to reform the water allocation system, how we at least do something that's responsible and accounts for the water that we know is already taken, and what we might have left. How do we do, how do we balance our checkbook on water? And this was an effort that Mark dubbed responsible water allocation. We worked very hard on it, and it turns out to be a very difficult system to modify. But we know we need to do it, and we're going to continue to work on it. The key is really to take a step back in every basin and do the basic research to understand what water is available and where have we over allocated, and then what are we going to do about that. And it sounds simple when I say it, but it's not. But it's really a step that we need to do. And I had hoped, and I think Mark had hoped, that we would make more progress on that issue this time. I think we will make progress in coming years. The governor is sympathetic to the notion that we need to get a handle on this. The way we do it is the question, and that means we've got more work coming on that issue.
All right, thank you. So there was a general comment or ask, and I will say it. It says Representative Owens, Helm, and Helfrich, convening a summit of the 20 Eastern Oregon legislatures is a must. We are just on the leading edge of this challenge. Not discounting the other counties or our future east of the valley is entirely tied to water. What can we do to push for uplands or I think it's going to be upland storage and flexible water rules? I think it's a two-part question: the rules and flexible storage, but also a water summit. I know Representative Owens has talked about those things before, and obviously that's not my committee, but I'd be more than happy to be a part of that. And so I think we can have that discussion offline, what that would look like. I know that we've had education, we've had roundtables around the state for other things, but I think that would be one worthwhile. But that would be in Representative Ken Helm's court when he thinks that would be a good one to do. And then another question is, water quality is said to be linked to quantity. As we deplete our resources, we degrade quality. How do you accommodate for all those stakeholders?
Thanks, Rep. Helfrich. And Jim, I'll take your question first, then I'll move towards your wife's. So bringing forward a Eastern Oregon Legislative Summit would be a good idea. We'll have to flesh that out more, like Rep. Helfrich said. A couple of things that we've done on that line we could probably build upon. Ken and I had this great notion to start the bicameral bipartisan water caucus, and we started that in January of 2023, and that's gaining steam. In fact, we've hired now a coordinator who's going to work on that for probably half their time, and that was from donations from multiple offices, I think, including Rep. Helfrich's offices, to get Harmony Burright up to speed. So that is to try to bring more of this water conversation to more legislators in that building, to show where we need to work. Part of that opportunity is going to be traveling around the state and looking at different areas and what they need. And I guarantee you, upland management, upland storage, and slowing water down is going to come in some of those conversations. So hopefully that can build enough synergy that we can start those conversations. We'll get back to you on, it's going to be more than the 20 Eastern Oregon representative centers. If we just limit those, we don't even invite Ken, but we'll figure out how to bring that together.
Ken's the chair. He has to organize the meeting for us.
Okay. Water quality and quantity, they are linked. Typically, the deeper you have to go for water, the more mineralization the waters become. Typically, you'll get more arsenic, more boron, and stuff like that. So as we deplete groundwater reservoirs, we're going to continue to battle water quality. We have not addressed water quality very much in the last 2 biennium. It is something that we've discussed, something that we've massaged around the edges. Yes, it will come up, I believe, in 2025 with a lot more conversations than what we've had previously. I know some of this stems from the nitrates in Morrill County and that horrific situation. Ken and I have talked with the governor's office multiple times, very supportive of them leading on that conversation, doing the testing they are doing, trying to figure out the legacy issues that are occurring and how to correct that. We're going to keep pushing for that, but we will expand the water quality conversation as we move forward.
All right. Next question is, how are you approaching permitting in regards to infiltration? There are currently many barriers to creating infiltrating waters bodies on private land, in part due to misunderstanding that ground and surface water are different. Have you begun work with relevant permitting bodies like ODF and W to create flexibility in those regulations?
This is, I think, I'll take a swing at this. All of our entities, all of our agencies that deal with water, so that means at least Water Resources Department, DEQ, Department of Ag, and ODFW. Yes, they have the notion that that we need to slow water down, as Mark mentioned, and that we need to figure out ways to replicate what we're losing over the next 20 years as the snowpack in the Cascades in particular, and in all of our mountainous areas around the state diminishes. And if you haven't heard it already, the state climatologists have been predicting that within 20 years, we will basically lose that snowpack. It doesn't mean the precipitation that forms the snow or has in the past will go away, but it does mean that it'll fall in the form of precipitation and run off. So we will lose the opportunity to get it and use it the way we want, and to keep it in stream for fish and wildlife as well. So we have to do things differently, as Mark said. And that means a variety of infrastructure in the uplands, both natural and built in some instances. It's an issue of bringing the agencies along from where they've been in the past. It has been difficult. Their agency missions are not oriented toward natural infrastructure solutions, and we do actually have to bring them along. And so this notion of having the permitting entities be more flexible, I think, is a rational and realistic expectation, but it will take time to reorient the agencies in that direction. And that's as much about collaboration between the legislature and the executive branch than it is passing new laws that mandate this, that, and the other. Because we really do need to adapt those administrative permitting systems to work better. And I think Mark and I are dedicated to doing that.
So seeing some questions pop up here and there, but one of the things, that Representative Owens and I talked about in session, that I received a question from the Welch's Villages area up in Mount Hood, was there was an issue with the water, water in Rhododendron, the water district there, and they had somebody purchased the land, and they had to create a buffer zone, and they had to use some of the reserves to buy out the buffer zone. Representative, can you talk about what specifically you guys did in the water realm in the legislature to help kind of deal with those issues that are happening when these small water districts don't have the money, or how they're able to get the resources that they need?
I'm trying to follow Representative Helm's lead by muting every time I'm not talking. I typically don't do that. Yeah, a couple ones. In-House Bill 2010. I know there was, I believe, $1 million put to source water protection funding. So like you talked about rhododendron, you talk about these communities that want to purchase land in a buffer. If you have a willing seller and a willing buyer, there is state help in order to buy some of that ground around those watersheds to, quote, protect your watershed. There also is the private forest accord that went through last 2 sessions ago that is really working on buffers and protecting those streams also. But if there is a need to acquire land, we can reach out to Water Resource Department and figure out that grant process. There's also some small community water systems. The Oregon Association of Water Districts received $1 million to work with our very smallest water associations to figure out what is the future plan. How do we figure out how all of our small communities can have quality potable water? Jeff, that's gonna be a tough one. I mean, we're looking at, I'll just give an example of Crane. Why? Because I can see it if I look out my window. Some ARPA funding, we brought in $3.2 million for them to build a community well and a lagoon system. There's only like 50 residents there. The cost to put in that system is going to be more than $3.2 million. They were built on tent lots. So they got septic systems closer to 100-foot to wells all over the place. Besides the water levels declining, I mean, it's a disaster waiting to happen. The community can never afford that funding, could never afford the debt load on that. How do we as a state figure out how we supply potable water to those that live in small municipalities? Or does the state have a responsibility to work with those who decide to live outside of an unincorporated area? How do we bring them water in? That conversation, along with a lot of others, is going to take, similar to the 2017 transportation package. If you look at League of Oregon Cities, Ken would know the number better than me, but I think it's 23 billion. Is that what it is, Ken? $23 billion is what the League of Oregon Cities said is needed in Oregon just to bring infrastructure back to where it needs to be. It's probably not what everybody wants to hear here, but we're going to have to figure out collectively in that building how we bring state funding in to match federal funding to work with these small areas.
So I have you and Representative Helm here. He and I both sit on housing. We worked through the ONA process, creating that dashboard and what that would look like for cities to come in compliance with the building, the certain buckets of housing that is needed across the spectrum to keep people housed and create new housing. Representative Owens or Helm, do you see a way, because I know like Corbett, we had our town hall in Corbett a while back, and they were talking about the water issues and the water sources, and they have these small communities that may have one staff person and maybe their administrator or just one person trying to do it all. Ken, I know that in ONA, they're going to have technical assistance with the new department that's created, and that kind of created a kerfuffle a little bit with some people about creating more layers of government. But do you know of anywhere, or do you think it'd be advisable somehow to create for these smaller communities that are unincorporated, like especially Corbett, they're unincorporated, but they're sitting in the National Scenic Area. They can't incorporate. They have certain rules they have to abide by with the National Scenic Area, but some agency that can be directed towards to help with technical assistance for some of these grants that are out there, not just at the state level, but at the federal level.
So I sympathize with the problem. First of all, it exists both in the water world and the land use world. Somebody that's smarter than me during that process that you mentioned, Jeff, of trying to create a system in the future that actually assesses the amount of land we need in cities and towns for housing and gets it on the ground, told me. He said, you know, back in 1973, when we passed the land use laws, we also thought that it was going to take a lot of staff at the local level to do. And we never got around to paying for that. So we forced this process, which has its pros and its cons, the land use system around the state, but we didn't help local jurisdictions pay for the planning staff that they really need to pull it off. That's still a need, and we really do need a mechanism to do that. The other problem that you allude to that I said exists both in the water world and in the land use world is there is a ton of federal money floating around now. We've heard about it in the news. There's been 3 or 4 federal programs that came out of the time when we were in the pandemic that are designed to help local jurisdictions with all sorts of things, including infrastructure of various types. To get at that money, states have to be able to do the research and the preparation, the technical design work to get applications that are competitive for that federal money. And it is unreasonable to expect city and county staff to add that to their smorgasbord of things that they already do and expect them to be successful. Mark and I have advocated for 2 sessions now that the state needs a central hub that adds capacity to local governments at the state level to go after these federal grants and the federal loan programs. We've really been beating the drum on this. The governor's office hasn't quite got the message yet. I think they're waking up, but what they're content with at the present moment, which really isn't working, is that there is part of one person's job at the agency to go after federal money or to help pull federal money down through the agency and get it to cities and counties. That's simply not good enough. We need a team, of people that helps every agency that is going after federal money do the job. There's research out there that says that states that are able to pursue that kind of methodology, they're considerably more effective at bringing down that federal money. So that's what we need to do. And it's a matter of convincing our executive branch that we should go do it.
Yeah, thank you. One of the questions from somebody in Wasco, it says in Wasco County, we had part of a parcel to allow some building on small acres. 2 acres is the minimum, but planning has made it impossible. My question is, how do we get planning to stop fighting housing? And that's smaller and efficient. That's a question I think for both Ken and I can talk about. We've under House Bill 3414 with the variances that we were going to have, plus the bringing in of the land within the urban growth boundary that was already identified as rural or as urban reserves, that would have brought in some extra land, but that would also have brought ability to have some variances be able to be accepted with that. I think we need to delve in more into that. I don't think in the short session we'll get there. There's going to be some minor fixes to 2001 and then the ONA with the dashboard, but the person's comments and questions is correct that we need to have our planning department, not stop fighting and saying no, but yes, how do we do that? But also we did have put the onus, like you said, Ken, with back in 73, how are we going to staff these things? And we think about that. And now you have these smaller cities like Hood River, Wasco, because of their size, they don't have enough capacity for having employees come in and be able to live in these communities. Hood River being, at $700,000, $800,000 is kind of a starter home now in this community. And that's just outrageous. But then you can't bring anybody in to be a planner and to permit processor and all those things along with that. So Ken, you had actually kind of talked about, I think it was Representative Gomberg's bill, I think it was, they called it the paratrooper bill, where they're dropping in specialists to come in, work on these projects and move them forward. Do you have any more ideas on the housing side from there?
No, I think we do. We need a tactical team that can help. I've been reading the chat and seeing some of the frustration with the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and I certainly understand it. The department has dictated a lot of rules for a long time. Those were designed to implement state laws, and I guess it's safe to say there's not consensus on whether our land use laws are good everywhere all the time. And I hear that, but the department is moving, I think, toward a more customer-oriented approach, and they are focusing on technical assistance ever more. So there's hope, and I think, like you, Jeff, I hear that the need is real. And so that will drive some solutions in the future, I hope.
Yeah. Somebody has a question. DEQ has an on-site septic program that can help with failing septics. Water Resource Department has well water grant loan program to help with, wait a minute, I guess I'm reading stuff out of line here. Get back up to the top. Natalie, what questions are you seeing that we need to?
That was Peggy Lynch giving some resources. So
Okay.
repair program still has $1.5 million that was authorized in 2021. So if you have a failing well, like some in Mosers and other areas, get a hold of your local water master. Your water master can guide you through that, getting some funding in order for you to abandon or replace your well. Also get a hold of DEQ or email Jeff or myself or Ken, and we can get you in contact with a DEQ person that can help with local septic systems. That was a former Representative Leaf who had passed away, his mission in order to figure out how to help small communities with septics failing. And Craft 3 got involved, and it's been successful, and they're still funding in that program. Thank you, Peggy.
I don't think we touched on this question from Suzanne. Are there funds to help farmers shift from till to no-till farming and use less fertilizers? The gist of the question is, given that those things use less water. So is there resources or talk about helping people shift from till to no-till farming?
Mark, you may know more about this on the ground. And I have to say, OSU Extension has so many programs out there that there may be something like this that I'm not aware of. We'll say this. We have in the state, we established an Oregon Ag Heritage Program a few sessions ago and funded that organization. And its mission is to particularly help small farming families both transition farms between generations, but also figure out how they can adopt practices that make sense for them, like no-till. And no-till is, as I understand it, a practice that some farmers find really useful. Other farmers are not interested. And there has been a desire for funding to help folks that want to do no-till for some time. In fact, we had proposed legislation that went a long way this session, but did not pass, that was a healthy soils program that would be exactly targeted to that type of activity. And instead, a Senate bill was adopted that we shorthand called the Natural and Working Lands Bill that does have some funding for those type of land practices. It hasn't hit the ground yet, but it can do similar work. And I think it's worth advocating wherever you can find an outlet that natural and working lands account should be used where appropriate, where people voluntarily want to make a change to no-till, that they could get some funding in that way. And we can give you more information. Any of our offices can get more information on that.
Before we leave, I will drop everyone's, the 3 representatives' email addresses into the chat box so that everybody can have those. I think we got time for a couple more. I don't recall hearing answers to this one. The question was saying, hey, some farms do a good job of being water aware, other farms not as much. So, and because this question specifically says, is the committee looking at anything? And we have the committee chair here. It's a perfect question. Is there anything within the committee's upcoming initiatives that is looking to address the gap in equity in terms of water usage from farm to farm?
Well, you have the chair and the vice chair, or one of the vice chairs. So Mark's got a lot to say on this too, so I'll keep it short. And I think it was Adam. Is that right? I saw this question in the chat. Yeah,
it was Adam. Yes, I was able to scroll up and find
Adam,
it.
you hit the nail on the head. This is the conundrum that Mark and I are one of them that we're trying to fix, which is when you've got folks that are wanting to conserve water, whether it's surface water sourced or groundwater, and they are putting the effort and many times the money to do that into play. How do you keep them, one, from not being harmed somehow by the prior appropriation system, which is a possibility, and how is it fair for what the water that you've conserved? How is it fair and equitable that it be distributed in the rest of the basin? And frankly, our legal system in prior appropriation at the present time thwarts that type of innovation. And figuring out how to get past that is super important. And I can't say that we have the answers right now, but you've hit on one of the central issues of how we manage water better in the state. And I'll hand it over to Mark to talk more about that.
Thanks, Ken. And yeah, Adam, when I read that one too, it's something we're struggling with as a state. And as Ken said, I mean, right now there's no incentive for farmers to conserve. Yes, in the water right, it has to go beneficial use without waste, but that's real broad for interpretation. The issue is, as a farmer myself, I'm given a rate and duty. So I'm giving a total amount of water that I can use and how fast I can apply that water. If I do not use all of that water, or my system is designed to where I cannot put out my full rate and duty, there's a potential where I could be jeopardizing that equity asset. It really doesn't happen, but there's that threat out there that use it or lose it. Water law is actually ready, willing, and able, but a lot of farmers are scared to use less. Because if they use less over a 5-year period of time, there is a way that somebody can come and say, you're not using all your water to beneficial use, so therefore we're going to try to maybe take it from you. Is that reality? I'm not positive it's reality, but the perception out there is enough that it disincentivizes a lot of farmers for wanting to use less of their water, even though they might need less to grow the crop. How do we incentivize farmers to use less? By giving them the ability and the security that they need. That's what we got to figure out policy-wise. We'll get there. I want to thank you and your farm for using less water, figuring out how to produce more crop per drop, because that's where we're all going to have to get. And it goes back to those community solutions. When all of us realize that we're in a water constrained environment, in order to feed 8 billion people, we're going to have to expand how we can grow crops. We're going to have to figure out how we get more crop per drop. And Adam, thank you. And something we're going to be working on for the next couple biennium.
And I just kind of want to highlight, I was kind of watching some stuff going on in the chat, and one of the things is talking about varieties that are efficient and use less water or drought resistant. And I think those are out there. It's up to the farmers and how they're doing that, looking at their crop yields. But I can say that Ken and I were on a water tour a few years ago here in the Hood River Valley, and I was very surprised. You were talking about 120 trees per acre that was used for pear growing or apples in the orchards, where the new technology, they're able to put triple that and put 1,200 trees on per acre and have the micro waterers and have the ability to really dial into where the moisture is in the ground, where it's too wet, not wet enough. They can really use science and technology to manage our water resources well. And I was really impressed with the technology and how they're just really dialing it down and individually looking at the different rows of the trees that were being the fruit trees that are being watered and producing. So it was pretty neat to see that. I know I come from a farming background in Nebraska and Colorado. Their water is controlled by how much power you use in your pivot, and getting more efficient pivots and using less water and having the sprinkler heads lower to the ground for alfalfa or through the cornfields, but you're still charged. You only have X amount of power you use for how they're measuring out your gallons per hour that you get to pump out into your field. So we have to figure out a good system, but I want to thank everybody for being here. I really appreciate it. And then your questions, if we didn't get to them, we'll try to get back to them. But if you do have questions for us, you have all our emails there. And I want to say thank you to Representative Owens, Representative Helm, and for everybody else that joined in to the conversation. I really appreciate that. Natalie, do you have anything else you want to add?
I just want to say, like you mentioned earlier, we did record this. So everyone that signed up, keep an eye out for an email from our office tomorrow of the recording. So if you want to go back and, you know, what was the answer to that, we will make sure that you guys all have that full recording tomorrow. So.
All right. All right. Hey, thank you very much. Appreciate you guys joining and sharing your an hour of your time out of your life to come listen to us talk and answer the questions. Have a great night and appreciate you being here.
Good night.
Thank
Thanks, folks.
Good to see you, Art.